In this video, I'm interviewing the creator of the one-man Star Wars trilogy, Charlie Ross. Let's jump right into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Christopher, and today a little bit of a different episode. I have a very special guest today, a Jedi Master in the theater world, a simple man trying to make his way in the universe, a fellow Canadian Star Wars fan, and the creator behind the one-man Star Wars trilogy, Charlie Ross. Charlie freaking Ross. Welcome to the channel. Thank you for coming on, sir.
Thank you, Charlie friggin' Ross the third.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Charlie freaking Ross the third.
Yeah, they were. I think my dad was Charlie. Well, my dad's Charlie friggin' Ross, and my grandfather was Charlie friggin' Ross. So,
Oh,
which
well,
is
there you go.
qualified
A
that
long
there wasn't.
line.
I wasn't really. We weren't really friggins, but some
Yeah.
people are really literal who listen. They'll be like, "Really?" I looked up Charlie
No,
friggin' Ross and
that's
didn't find
that's
it.
not really your middle name. So,
No, no.
but
But
I
I
would say
appreciate it.
a little bit of a legend in the Star Wars theater community. I think can you just
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about yourself and
yeah.
introduce yourself? Where can people find you and what you do?
They can find me on onemanStarWars.com, all lowercase, all letters, ONEMANSTRWARS.com. Um, I've been doing my one man Star Wars show since like 2000. And what my show is, it's me on stage, no costume, no set, no props. Just, I mean, other than
Yep.
I do have lighting and I use a microphone, but I'm just wearing just like neutral clothing, and I wear a pair of coveralls that you would use if you worked in the oil industry, because it's really really durable and doesn't show up any of the sweat and the dirt. And I'm recreating the original trilogy on stage, just myself. Doing this long form homage impression of Star Wars, mainly because that's what I grew up with. Uh,
Yeah.
and up to a certain point, I think people would arguably say it was the best uh, trilogy, only in the sense that it wasn't trying to match up to a benchmark. Like there wasn't sort of something that
Yes.
had set the base level of what Star Wars could be. So, and I mean, I didn't
Exactly.
think it through as a kid. I mean, just I'm sure for a lot of people, they just enjoyed Star Wars because it was so honestly itself. Wasn't trying to.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it was, I think, referencing a lot of different types of different films and stories that were out there, it
Yeah, and
was
heavily inspired by
undeniably
the like the Japanese, like the Kurosawa and stuff like that,
right.
and the World War II, the plant the dog fights and stuff. So
Sure,
you
sure,
can see
yeah.
that kind of inspiration in Star Wars. Yeah.
But then even
So
Empire and Jedi. I mean, they weren't really. They were kind of breaking new ground. I think that there were, sequel films, but it being a trilogy as it was, I'm really trying to think. Other than like maybe Star Trekky episodic type of things, this was like the continuing story of Luke Skywalker, and who knows
yeah,
if the original film didn't do as well as it did, would they have bothered to make Empire? Would they have bothered to make Jedi? And if they hadn't, I think it would still stand alone as one of those remarkable movies that is so well
yeah,
crafted and told that it just
yeah,
rises to this explosion, literal explosion.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm happy that it did get a sequel and another sequel, and then well,
Me too.
six more sequels eventually. Yeah.
Sure.
So do you have a favorite Star Wars movie? Is it one of the original three?
I don't necessarily have a favorite. I would probably have to say that the very first one was like my true love, because I mean, where I grew up was a place called Prince George, so same latitude as Edmonton, um,
Yep.
over the top of the Rockies, high country, sort of not super high country, but high enough that I think back in the day it would have been more of a like a cattle kind of country, but it was a softwood lumber place that I grew up. My dad was an architect. We lived in the town of Prince George, and then moved out to a farm. So when we moved out to the farm, I was 7. Before we'd moved out there, I had seen Star Wars, the very first movie. And I'll give a little
Yeah.
bit of context. My dad was an architect. Some of the first jobs he ever had were in Waikiki. He was building
Okay.
condominiums. So we would go
Nice.
there. Yeah, and I remember seeing the very first movie in Waikiki. So it was massive, and I wasn't home when I saw it. Like I saw it in this sort of different environment. Um,
Yeah.
and it was I was old enough at the time that it wasn't the original showing of it. It was showing with Empire, because I was too young when the first one came out to really be
Right.
going to the movie theater at the time. Um, but I recorded the very first Star Wars flick off of television because it had aired. So
Yeah.
with the commercials and everything. And when I moved out to the farm, we didn't really have any TV reception. We had some movies, and my go-to movie was A New Hope. So I
Yeah.
watched it an unbelievable amount of times, and maybe not unbelievable over the course of a life, but when you're a kid and you don't really have
Yeah.
any uh, sense of critical, you'd watch the A Team and think you're seeing a different episode every single time, even though it's the exact same thing every
Yeah.
time. I would watch A New Hope and sometimes have it as background noise. And I think it kind of it imprinted into my head, to my heart.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Soaked in
we
like a
eventually
sponge
moved.
almost, eh?
Yeah, and we moved from the farm, and I mean that's when I was able to access a copy of Empire and Jedi, and I think Jedi was probably the had the biggest impact because I was old enough when I went to the movie theater, um, and I already knew Empire and A New Hope really really well, but Jedi told the end of the story, or for what I thought was the end of the story. So it
Yeah.
was kind of amazing and crushing at the same time, because I don't remember for me. I remember being in the theater, and the effect of being on the speeder bikes was so
Oh yeah.
epic.
Yeah.
We had
Yeah.
nothing to compare it to. It was like a ride, and the whole theater was like, oh, and I was all of 8 years old. Went with my two friends for my birthday. It was the best. But so to answer your question, I think the first one had the greatest long term effect, by
Yeah.
virtue of the fact that it took a long time to really imprint into my head.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So for me it's Empire Strikes Back. Just because like
Sure,
I remember like 1997 when the special edition trilogy came out,
sure,
and my dad
yeah,
took my brother and I to the theater, so we saw all three. But the Empire Strikes Back, it stood out so much with that spoiler alert,
yeah,
that big reveal of Darth Vader being
oh,
Luke's father, and like it
yeah.
was very dark, and there's no happy ending. Like I was kind of different
No,
for a film like that back then too. So
right.
that's kind of how I kind of got my start and my introduced to Star Wars, and
It,
introduced into
it's
all
hard
this
to
mess here. So
it's hard to tell a second story, and yet some people
yeah.
totally get the second chapter right, and
Yeah.
oftentimes don't follow up with a really good third chapter.
Yeah.
You kind of
But
blow out your ACL.
I think they did a yeah I think they did a really great job of the like all three of them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the fact is they didn't necessarily know what they were doing, and there was
Yeah.
nobody telling them per se exactly what they were doing. Maybe at the time, I think George Lucas would have had enough creatives around him that still could, and maybe even some power dynamics that would allow, they needed to have a different editor. They needed to have a different screenwriter, even a different director.
Yeah.
And George Lucas did what he does so well, which is bring it all together. But
Yeah.
by the time the sequels or the prequels came out, I mean, you can see he really wanted to just sort of do it all himself, and in
Yeah.
doing so, um, you see what he's capable of doing, and obviously some of the strongest parts of the prequels are just the vision of the galaxy that he made, or that he
Yeah.
created, and then everybody's input into it. And I mean, the perfect example would be like when you look down and see just the movement of all the ships there on Coruscant, and just think of it
Yeah.
as like this breathing, almost like it's like covered with germs, but there's just people. Like, how many billions of people are there, and aliens are there? What are they doing?
Yeah.
Like, where are they going in these giant ships and stuff? It's so much. It's almost like looking into a brain, and just sort of seeing all the synapses, all the big ideas, the small ones, just the non sequiturs just going by.
Yeah.
And some people find that overwhelming, but I really do feel that with George Lucas and trying to take on the prequels, just it's ostensibly on his own in a way.
Yeah.
It's almost too much for any person to be able to really unify that vision, even a group of people to unify that vision, um, of the story, because he did the script, and
Yeah.
directing and all the rest of it. It's hard to farm that out, especially when you need to have that ownership and you need to show that you're capable of doing it. That's the type of thing I've done with my
Yeah.
show, which is that when I was a kid, I loved Star Wars and we would play Star Wars, but I might get today, I might have to be Chewbacca. Chewbacca's awesome in the movie, but he's not fun to play
Yeah.
because he doesn't have
Right.
anything to say. We all want to be Han, we all want to be Luke, or
Yeah.
maybe get to be Boba Fett or maybe Vader. But if you're stuck being Chewbacca, it sucks. So nice thing
Yeah.
about my show is that I get to be everybody,
Every single character. Yeah. And
every single
like, so
character.
I first saw your show. You were at the St. Albert, the theater there in St. Albert there. And my
Yeah,
friend was like, hey, it's Star Wars Day. This guy's doing this Star Wars one man Star Wars show. I hadn't heard of it, so I was like, yeah, what? It could be a fun experience, and you know what? I'm glad I went because like it exceeded my expectations. But
that's good.
for people who haven't seen your show or they don't know about your show, like what can they expect when they come to your show?
Well, so you kind of bring your own knowledge of Star Wars, right? And
Yeah,
when you come into this, I mean, there's no costume, like I say, no set. You're just seeing a blank
yeah,
stage, and one man Star Wars just up there on the curtains, and the Star Wars music. I've been licensed and I am licensed by Disney, so
oh,
there's
okay,
something quasi legitimate, about the whole thing.
yeah,
I've been doing the show for like over 20 years now, which is ridiculous. And
yeah,
I mean, I come out and I just, the lights go down and I start to do the opening fanfare of 20th Century Fox. And I
yeah,
go right into the story. And right off the bat, like I'm using lines and making huge editorial cuts. I'm going from, the first 30 seconds of the movie. Suddenly I'm 5 minutes into the movie. Next thing I'm 30 minutes into the movie. I just
yeah,
make these huge jumps, being all the characters, sometimes making a comment about maybe the performance quality or lack thereof of certain people in the film when it's happening, or the ridiculous lines. I'm sort of
yeah,
commenting as I'm going and just blowing through the original trilogy, telling it from the first story to the last. And each
yeah,
film is about 20 minutes of me doing it. And I'm doing the music and I'm, flying the ships and I'm just using my body, almost being like an 8-year-old kid would be, because
yeah,
that was the energy I think I had when I, obviously when I first watched the movies, but carrying over that sort of childlike exuberance that I think people can still have for the films. That's
right,
what I bring to the show, and I think people recognize that that energy and that sort of unfettered um, love of Star Wars. It reminds us of being a kid, just because
yeah,
you're not really being too discerning when you're a kid. You just love because you do, and that's where I'm
yeah.
coming from.
Yeah, and
So
that's
yeah,
exactly how I felt watching the show too. Like it felt like watching a kid play in his backyard with playing the movements of the ships
yeah,
and stuff. And I
sure.
correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you even did like the scroll thing, didn't you? Didn't you do the whole
Oh yeah,
perform the whole scroll
Star
thing at the beginning?
Wars.
Yeah,
They go the
yeah. And you read the whole thing, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I at one
yeah,
point I used to do the whole Jedi thing, like Luke Skywalker has returned to his home planet Tatooine and attempt to rescue his friend
yeah,
Han Solo from the clutches of the vile gangster Jabba the Hutt. Just doing.
yeah.
I used to just do the whole thing, but then I
Read the whole,
realized
yeah,
that it made more sense to sort of make a little song that kind of just
yeah,
commented on it. Yeah, and
yeah,
certainly there's been other Star Wars creations, or like homage creations that make a
yeah,
comment about the scrolling words,
yeah,
because they're a bit weird. But then I think they reused them in what was it? Oh darn it! It was Buck Rogers, I think. That like somebody
yeah,
pointed out that in Buck Rogers, which is something that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas had watched, that there was like meanwhile it's like he's returned to this place, he's on this planet and doing this thing. That's sort of what it's making a comment
yeah,
about, and yet for some reason most of the world's going to think of that originating with Star Wars, even though it's a derivative of. But
Yeah.
it's unique. It becomes the signature part of watching a Star Wars movie, that we just have a bit of sitting you down into where the world is. And yet, I think the original scrolls are the ones that have the most impact. Like, I don't remember the scrolls from the new ones, and I barely remember anything from the prequels. It didn't have the same
Yeah.
bizarre impact that the original ones did.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So you have changed some things over the over the years
Oh
of you
yeah,
performing the show. So how else
yeah.
have you how else has the show evolved since you
Well, I
started
call it
20 years ago?
mutated more than like evolved. Well, I mean, like with every new film that comes out, every new story, there's new jokes. Sometimes things that were wide open that I could kind of poke
Yeah.
fun at, they get filled in, and it's no longer an obscure, like like there was always that weird hanging thing. There was a point that Obi-Wan Kenobi made where he had said that that Anakin had, or rather, that Vader had betrayed and murdered Luke's father. Like, it's a complete lie. In point of
Yeah.
view, that's ridiculous. It's almost like it's basically lying and saying, well, you weren't ready to hear the truth. Like, of course he was ready to hear the truth. If the truth becomes your foundation of where you take off from, you're going to, help hopefully shepherd that person in the right direction. And if it's a new Jedi, well, get the anger out, get all that emotion flowing, not so that that's what you're coasting on, but so that you can try to level it out and then work on the piece on top of it. But
Yeah.
it's like they made Luke into the kind of person he was, and that they they betrayed him. They didn't tell him the truth. And so
Yeah.
when he suddenly had power and suddenly had already, blown up the Death Star, he'd become a Jedi. He was a lethal, powerful weapon. Then he finds out the truth. Anakin comes along, and he's able to sort of put his little pincers into him, and Luke's completely on his own. He cannot trust the
Yeah.
people that he trusted before, and he can't trust Anakin, his father. He can't trust the dark side. Completely on his own. So he has to trust himself, trust his own feeling. So, I mean, the original part of the question is like, what has changed? A lot of times, like, I can over intellectualize these little jokes, but sometimes it can be just sort of can be one or two little statements, or even like one little word, or just a
Yeah.
look. And for me, like Ben Kenobi, one thing that happened was that when he told Luke that Vader betrayed and murdered his father, he grew this Pinocchio nose. He's just like such a freaking liar. So even though he's
Yeah.
like answering Luke's question, he's just
Yeah.
that's in the story. And later he rounds back to it where Luke's like, you told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father. It's like, well, what I told you was the truth from a certain point of view. I mean,
Yeah.
like, it's like, what are you talking about? And yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, there's just been, my jokes get longer. I mean, it's not remarkable, because as you get older, you go into more detail and you just bore the crap out of
Yeah.
everybody. But my jokes get longer and longer and longer, and hopefully more funny. But yeah,
Yeah.
the degrees to which Kenobi has lied, especially when you have like Ben Kenobi, what's there, Obi-Wan. I mean, if there's anybody that betrayed and murdered Anakin, maybe not betrayed, but murdered, it's Obi-Wan. Like, he's kicked his ass so many times.
Yeah.
He fell into
Yeah.
a river of lava and burned up, and then he kicked his ass, like in Obi-Wan. Like, it's
Yeah.
beautiful, it's amazing. But it really says a lot about just how powerful Ben is. More powerful because he he doesn't commit to the murder. He doesn't destroy
Yeah.
the thing he knows he can destroy. And
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, I mean, as the stories evolve, it informs the jokes. It sometimes kills a joke, or makes it a longer thing. And I just never know what that's
Right.
going to be until those stories come out, and it means I have to
Yeah.
watch everything, because if I don't watch
Yes.
everything, I'm not up with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
grab my
So
coffee.
so you yeah, so you have kept up with the with all of the Star Wars. Have you watched all of the like the cartoons like the Clone Wars and Rebels to get a sense of like what happened in those eras as well
Yeah,
or
absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating, and it's funny because even though when I first watched like the original cartoons, uh, I thought, oh, are they aiming this at kids? I'm like, no, they're just trying to make the movies on a cheaper dime
yeah.
and go further into some of the stories that you wanted to know about. Even though like some of the main characters tend to be kids, we really are wanting just to see how the adults are doing, how the main characters are doing. And
Yeah.
I just I think they've completely gone beyond what a cartoon may have ever been geared towards, and now they can tell us stories and go places and probably do it on a much cheaper and faster turnaround time than making
Yeah.
a movie from scratch. What I mean, what is your thought
Yeah.
on them?
So, I mean, like, I agree. I think George, and at the time, I think he had brought on Dave Filoni to do some of the Clone Wars and
Yeah,
more so Rebels. He involved him more in Rebels. So, I think that it did a great job of bringing us these stories, like you mentioned, that we wanted to know. And going back to like the Obi-Wan thing, him being strong, like he
yeah,
lost a lot. Like he lost what was her name, Satine Kryze,
yeah,
like the love of his life. He lost
yeah,
uh he lost his friend in Anakin, and he lost like the Jedi Order, and he still didn't turn. He just still didn't like murder Vader later after the fall of the Republic. So that shows strength in that as well. So
yeah.
like really incredible
It
stuff.
I kind of feel like the amount of tragedy that happens to Obi-Wan's life is exactly what the Jedi Order is supposed to be able to combat. It's like if you
Yeah,
had, I mean, not to get too heady about it, but like if you had trauma and how do you how do you deal with it? How do you manage it? How do you move on? Methodically, he moves on, including in Obi-Wan, wallowing, wallowing and
yeah,
removing and isolating. It's an amazing thing that they can take something that's as simple and almost B movie quality like Star Wars, and when they have everybody's attention and everybody's tuned in, they can start to deal with bigger issues that really have
yeah,
nothing to do with Star Wars, but it would happen to the characters, and it grounds the characters into becoming more and more developed, bigger and bigger, to the point where when you go back and watch the movies now, like the original performance of um, you know in A New Hope, you suddenly look at Alec Guinness and you're imprinting all this stuff that you know onto his performance, even though he had no idea. He
yeah,
was just performing,
yeah.
but it brings so much to it, and that enriches our experience. And yeah, I think as a human race, if we can find any way to deal with something like mental health and trauma, like how do you get past that? How do
Yeah,
you work through it? And how do you continue to fail and yet, you know, because Obi-Wan was not going to get better. He didn't have the goal of getting better. He had the goal of getting away and being alone and just removing everything from his life. And it wasn't until he began to reach out and people reached out to him and he finally made a connection that, and then uh, literally confronted one of his biggest traumas, his biggest fears, which is,
yeah,
Anakin, returning to Anakin, and then Vader turning him, killing him, whatever. It, it's a little bit oblique. It's a big kind of like a mallet, but still
yeah,
seeing somebody go through the failure, lose lose people, continue to fail, but then eventually moving onto a road of uh, wellness or therapy. Because I mean, if
yeah,
you think about it, we never hear about Qui-Gon, we never hear about that at all, and yet what I think is implied is that in all this time that when Obi-Wan's alone, that he isn't. He has his old teacher, his old friend to be able
yeah,
to commune with and to work through things, to plan. Um, I mean, I don't know if he came up with a plan or what. It seems like everybody was blindsided by the eventual need of Leia coming down to get Obi-Wan. I always thought that was a bit of a fluke that she just managed to show up near to the planet where Obi-Wan, who's the only one that can actually help them out,
Yeah.
happens to be. But the midichlorians, like they meant it to happen or whatever. Like they've got
Yeah.
all the bases covered. Like that any little hole that we find, they just stuff something in there and go, that's the reason.
Yeah.
Midichlorians. Like, okay,
Yeah. They,
midichlorians did
they
it.
and they filled that in too. Like the whole. I always thought it was weird, like how Leia, like the whole Leia and Kenobi bond, because like they didn't really know each other, but now watching the Obi-Wan series and seeing them connect during that, I kind of filled that in too.
Yeah, it
So
did.
I
And
thought that was a great idea on their part as well.
well, Obi-Wan was there when she was born.
Yeah.
He watched her be born. I mean, like he's known her from the second she saw light. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's never not been a connection between the two. Anakin
Yeah.
has never been there for anything. It's like his initial meeting of Luke is in the trench as he's trying to kill him. And
Yeah.
I always imprinted onto the story, even when I was younger, and found out, the truth of who Vader was, that the reason why he couldn't or didn't kill Luke is because the Force is strong with this one, and that there's something that either stops him or like literally prevents him from being able to focus. Like even the computer doesn't quite get
Right.
the right shot, or something inside of him. And you can call it midichlorians, or you can just call it conflict. The conflict
Yeah.
inside of him prevents him from doing this, because even like with the adjustments that they did in like I'm not sure which which permutation, but where the Emperor in uh, Empire is speaking to Vader and said, "The son of Skywalker must not, must not become a Jedi or whatever." Like
Yeah.
they knew right away. So it's like there was no sort of secret at that point, and
Yeah.
it seems ridiculous that they should know that quickly. I mean, unless they plastered Luke Skywalker's face all over some kind of newspaper that the Empire managed to like pick up one morning with their slippers. But why would they know who he was? And
Yeah.
I think it's actually kind of cooler that they don't know, or they're not talking about it. They just sort of communicate and feeling, and that the the big big the big thing that happens with Vader is that he makes the choice to tell Luke who he is when they confront each other on Cloud City. That he hadn't
Yeah.
planned on doing this. It's in that moment where he's either going to have to destroy him, and he goes like, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. That,
Yeah.
and that things actually very much like in A New Hope, they're instead of like attacking and improvising when they're in the trench, you have Anakin and Luke improvising and adjusting while they're hanging out there on this little tiny, this little piece of skin where it could all fall apart.
Yeah.
And there's that literal precipice that they're going to go one direction or the other. And it makes the choice that Luke does make extremely powerful. He'd rather die than join him, even knowing the truth.
Yeah.
Because ostensibly, Luke sacrifices himself at that moment. He does what nobody else would do. It's like Gollum being the only thing that can actually destroy the ring, or Smeagol, because he has to throw himself in to destroy himself with the ring. It's like the evil's
Yeah.
part of him. Well, Luke is kind of now in crisis, trauma, despair, and in that moment would rather die than face the
Yeah.
truth. And in Jedi, he faces all kinds of monsters completely on his own. No Yoda, no Obi-Wan, nothing.
Yeah.
He's powerful at that point. And we know now why he's powerful, because we've got all those filler stories to sort of show him
Yeah.
becoming stronger, taking on a leadership role. In
Yeah.
a sense, even looking after and teaching new ones. But he's incredibly strong at that point. And he never, even though he won't lash out and kill, he never cracks. Never.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like an uncorruptible power, because he doesn't really seek the power that that Anakin or the Emperor ever did. That makes him a very powerful person, very close to Obi-Wan, but almost more like a victim. And I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
sure what you feel like with the new movies, but the new movies, he becomes almost crotchety and almost like a curmudgeon, and that he
Yeah.
goes through what Obi-Wan does. He hides himself, hides away, and then when he comes back, he kind of settles a couple deals, and then goes off to peace. Like maybe he's already
Yeah.
found a center
Yeah.
of peace already. So I don't know. I think the best part of Luke's story really is in the original trilogy.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, like the sequel trilogy, like I know that's not everyone's cup of tea right now. Like not everyone likes the whole how they treated Luke Skywalker in the sequels. There,
I
I quite enjoyed it.
I love them. I love them.
Yeah, like he follows Obi-Wan's path and Yoda's path of like going into
Yeah,
hiding after failure. So it makes
he
sense.
models.
Like the
Yeah,
repetition.
totally.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. He lived his whole life on a farm where he felt the least, powerful to affect any change. And when he did then become the ultimate agent of change, political, social, like he was a powerful, powerful person. Um,
Yeah.
After trying to sort of restart an agency, an order, when everything completely fell apart and he was messing it up, like the things that happened to him in the past had informed and almost like mutated his ability to clearly teach the way that like Yoda might or Obi-Wan might. He didn't have any other people to really teach with him, so he's kind of going
Yeah.
at it alone and making more monsters rather than making anything else. So he escapes and removes himself from being either a weapon or being hurt further. Uh, Even though might remove himself from the force, he's instantly able to do things that no one else that we've ever seen has done. Project his
Yeah.
very image across the galaxy, and
Yeah.
from where he's at, actually affect the change that he had to do before. He had to physically be in these places to make a change. And in this case
Yeah.
here, he's able to confront and even see his sister and stuff. And yeah, I mean, even though he dies, I think if anything, Star Wars has shown us in the way the story is there that you don't actually have to physically be in a place. It's an idea. It's what Ray is inspired by. Apparently, what all people in the galaxy are inspired by, in the absence of there being the Jedi and the Old Republic. Um,
Yeah.
there's evil, and then there's still the rebellion. There's still the conflict, and there was once a time where there was these mythical knights that were there and fighting for the good thing. And Luke Skywalker really blew up the Death Star, and they really blew it up again. They killed the Emperor. They did this stuff, and
Yeah.
yeah, when the idea is bigger, life and death doesn't make a difference. Like Luke doesn't have to be there in the story. He didn't have to be there in the prequels to not physically, in our minds, not physically, but I mean like in a sort of thematic way, be in our minds while we're watching these movies. And even
Yeah.
though it might make us go like it's not as good as the original, it doesn't matter. Like it's just these are just hard chapters of a bigger
Yeah.
story. And
Yeah.
the new offerings, you cannot please everybody, and sometimes you can't
No.
please anybody. But
Yeah.
if people could actually look standing very far away from what Disney, what Lucasfilm is having to do or has chosen to do with the sequels, is to find directors that are going to work. And I think J.J. Abrams is a great example. I kind of wish he would have done all three. There would be some continuity through it. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter that they did choose a different direction. There's just no verisimilitude. Like there's no continuity in the theme or the way the story's unfolding. Um, and I also think that they were listening too much to fandom. I kind of wish that
Yeah.
they would push through, because a lot of people didn't like C-3PO in the beginning. He was just this sort of high-pitched car salesman that people just
Yeah.
didn't like, and over time you begin to love. Jar Jar Binks, another example. They
Yeah.
kept putting him in there, but he did not have a central role really after the first movie. And yeah, every time they introduced like a new character, I kind of felt like they were so busy taking the pulse of what people felt that they abandoned the character, they abandoned the story, they abandoned the investment that we had. And
Yeah.
yeah, it made for kind of a bit of like a, you want a chocolate? No. Do you want this chocolate? No. Do you want that chocolate?
Yeah.
No. And it's like we
Yeah.
just want to bite. We want to be able to bite and like it or not and move through it. So
Yeah.
is there anything more dangerous than a fan? Because a fan at the beginning is a beautiful, wonderful thing, but they can become a bit of a monster if you don't
Yeah.
keep feeding them
Yeah.
exactly what they want.
Especially in
It's
this,
like
especially in this fandom here. Like you see all those
a
memes
little
of
bit.
like Lord of the Rings fans, and they're all like casually talking, and then Star Wars fans, they got their lightsabers out, they're fighting each other and arguing. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's exactly like that. Uh, but
but
I want to go back to
luckily, oh, go ahead.
yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, to say luckily we don't really have lightsabers. Otherwise, there'd be a lot of dead fans out there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, no, I want to go back to talk a little bit more about your show. I want to go
yeah.
back like 20 years ago when you started your show. Like, how did you come up with that idea, and when abouts did you come up with that idea?
Well, so the idea actually goes back even further than the 20 years. Back in 1996, I did my first, big department, 1994, I did my first ever tour of the Canadian Fringe Festival. And I also did one American
Okay. Yeah.
city. And the Fringe, for those that don't know, it's really small, like a small theater, as in like cheap theater, I guess you could say, like easy to produce
Yeah.
theater. They have festivals in cities all around the world, but the original one was in Edinburgh, uh, and the Edinburgh Festival would happen in August, and there was only so many people that could be in the main Edinburgh Festival. So they started to do these sort of venues that were close to. If this is the middle of Edinburgh itself, they would find, well, there's a little theater that we can use right here, and I'm going to put on my show at the same time as the main festival is going, but I'll just be on the fringe of the rest of the festival. And other people said, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's a great idea. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. That's a great idea." Until the Fringe is bigger than the Edinburgh Festival is at all. It's the Edinburgh Fringe, like
Yeah.
3,800 shows over the course of 1 month. Like it's ridiculous, unbelievable.
Yeah.
No,
That's
there's no other
incredible.
festival that's no other festival is quite that big, but they're everywhere around the world. So for someone like
Yeah.
myself, I went to theater school, got my Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater, started working in theater. This is around 1997 when I graduated, and like I say, about 3-4 years before that, I had done the Fringe Festival
Yeah.
tour, and I remember being out on the festival tour, and the show I was in was a fun show, but it wasn't something I wrote. It was nerdy, and I was surprised that people would come to see it. It was cool, and I made a little bit of bit of money during the course of the summer, but not like some shows that were out there that were really
Right.
doing well, and they just sort of had their finger on the pulse of whatever people found popular at the moment. One guy that I remember seeing, this guy Mike Shaldemos, did a show called The Scions of Hydra, and in his mind, it was the lost Star Trek episode, which never existed. But he
Right.
used this show that he created to do his best impressions of the characters from the original Star Trek series, including his
Yeah.
Kirk, which is exquisite. So it was so funny to see him being, it's just beautiful to watch him be all these different characters that you already know, but in this
Yeah.
original story, and it's just one guy doing it all on his own. And every single bum in the seat that was watching the show, he was getting the ticket. Like it was just going to him. It wasn't for like a whole cast full
Yeah.
of people. The show I was in had 4 people, so a lot of if you made $1,000, if it's a solo show, you make all 1,000 of that dollars, other as opposed to the 250.
Yeah.
So financially, it made a little bit more sense. So I remember talking with my buddy who was out on the Fringe Festival, different show, but we'd both been in university with each other, This is TJ Daw.
Yeah.
Anyway, my buddy, and I remember we get in the conversation. You talk about things like what could you make that would be like this sort of Star Trek show. And Star Wars obviously came into the conversation, but I remember also we talked about doing like the whole history of film, but in an hour where you could do all your favorite bits. And
Yeah.
flash forward several years later, I was doing a show with TJ and a buddy of mine, Mike Rinaldi, and we were in Toronto, and we were working with a director. We were working on some radio plays, and these were radio plays for CBC. So, we were outside of university. We were outside of doing the Fringe Festival at this point. We were trying to work professionally in whatever we could. And I remember that TJ and I talked about this old idea that we had, which was the history of film. And, we got to yakking on about it. And it just, at the time, when we were doing these radio plays, we had an opportunity to perform them for a live audience. So
Yeah.
we were going to bring more stuff to the table. We were going to do some sketch comedy and like make a whole evening of entertainment for these folks that were coming to see our radio plays. And I didn't have a lot of material to bring, so I wanted to write something new. And I tried sitting down to write the history of film, and I went with the movie I knew best, which was A New Hope. And when I
Yeah.
thought I'd write 5 minutes or whatever, no, I had about 35 minutes worth of material. So I had originally thought I can't do it as a solo show. It needs to be Mike and TJ. They need to be in the show too. So I wrote it envisioning that they would be playing other characters. And I
Right.
remember giving them the script. I came to rehearsal, and I remember giving them the script, and they didn't understand what I was going for with the script. Like they couldn't quite keep up with what I was trying to do. So I gave them a line reading. I said, "Well, it goes like this," and I just started to do the bits, but I was like doing my best impression as I'm going.
Yeah.
And I remember Mike going, "Well, why don't you just do it? No, you should just do it yourself." And I'm like, "No one's gonna. No, that's ridiculous." And then it's like, well, I guess I could. So I started to rehearse it that way. With TJ was there, Mike was there, and Paul, my buddy, who was our director, was also there. So they were watching me do the stuff that I'd written in the script. And then how it culminated was the night that we were performing the radio plays and the other sketch comedy. I also did my one-man Star Wars, just the first movie. And
Yeah.
I remember, and sometimes this might happen to you in your life, where a good idea is just like, holy crap, that was a good idea. I remember how it went and the reaction from the audience. Just it was absolute silence and then just roaring laughter. And it felt so fresh and neat to be
Yeah.
doing this because I thought, I don't know if anybody does this. This is just really fun. And really mixed bag of people that were there to see our show. Like no definite Star Wars fan that I could see. They weren't coming to see this. They were coming to see like a radio play. And here I'm doing this Star Wars thing, and it went so well that it took on already began to sort of take on a new life. Where I'm like, this can't end here. This
Yeah.
this has to happen again. So
Yeah.
myself and TJ actually, I worked on the script, and then I remember using him as a director, like as an outside eye, and cobbled together the one man Star Wars, and it took about another year or so before I was actually touring on the Fringe festivals because it was cheap,
Yeah.
and people didn't know what to expect, and that was a perfect environment for me.
Yeah. Awesome. So when did you incorporate the rest of the trilogy into your show then? Because you said
Right away.
at first it was just right away.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like I remember doing like a New Hope, and
Yeah.
the big thing was like, okay, so a New Hope is working. How do we bring in Empire? How do I bring in Jedi? And that was like the
Yeah.
new script writing that needed to happen, and it was hard to know what to cut. Always hard to know what to
Right.
cut. Um,
Yeah.
but luckily, I didn't go back to the movies and play and stop and play and stop. I just went from what I could remember, which turned out to
Right.
be a lot. Um, and interestingly enough, I think after this had all been done, it's actually the best way to write a show like this because people have limited memory as well. They can't remember every single detail. So the
Right.
big editorial jumps, the big cognitive jumps that I'm making were the type of jumps that I think other people could make as well. it kind of suited the human brain. Like you don't remember everything. You remember only so much of a story. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, like my human limitations are kind of what makes the show accessible because
Right.
human limitations, right? We only remember the details to the point that we do, and it makes for a show that is accessible, even for people that don't
Right.
remember Star Wars. Because I mean, my mom, she didn't really sit down and watch a lot of it, but so much of the story gets absorbed, and
Yeah.
either it's out there, it's either out there in the culture, and people make reference to it, or you listen to your kid for the 400th time watching Star Wars. The music's in your head, the lines are in your head, they're just there in the background. And like lyrics to a song, you can't help but pick it up when it plays on the radio.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned like making certain cuts at certain points in your show, like cutting out
Yeah.
segments of the movie. So like how do you balance like staying true to the original Star Wars trilogy while adding like your own comedic flair and performance, and deciding like how do you decide what portions to cut out of the
It's love.
trilogy?
It's all about love. If the love is genuine, you're always going to be the genuine thing.
Yeah.
You cannot manufacture love. If you feel contempt for your source material, it will come out.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out what to cut out and to leave in, a lot of what I did was just I put it up in front of an audience, and some of the stuff that just wasn't landing, like jokes,
Yeah.
it's easy to cut. It's really easy to cut.
Yeah.
It's hard to add stuff back in. Um, and I actually found that my show was almost like elastic in that if the audience was really into the story or the way I was telling it, the show could get like as much as 5 minutes longer than
Right.
last night's show if the audience wasn't quite into it. Just because you slow down the jokes or you milk them a little bit more or you just improvise a little bit. And
Yeah.
if the audience has the same kind of genuine love as you do, you can just go a bit further. And it's hard. I need to always remember that it's my show, that I don't have to get off stage. There's not somebody else who's coming on. It's just me. So
Yeah.
the audience has paid their ticket. Their bum is in the seat. We're here, and let's celebrate what we love, but also what we're here to
Yeah.
poke a bit of fun at. Not because it's
Yeah.
we hate it. It's not that at all. It's just sometimes like you might have like that one particular aunt that kind of you love her so very much you can't imagine your life without her, but she
Yeah.
also sometimes makes you kind of go like, oh my god, there you go again.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the attitude I think I'm taking with one man Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of preparation do you and rehearsal goes into like putting on the show? And do you have any like pre-performance rituals that you perform
Oh yeah.
before your show? Any things that you have to have like in your green room or whatever per se before you go on your show?
This is kind of a long answer, but no, I mean every answer is long. The rehearsal is, imagine just playing as a kid, but repeating it,
Yeah.
repeating it,
Yeah.
repeating it, repeating it. If you've ever rehearsed stuff theater, you know what's involved with that. You break down all the beats. It's like a piece of a piece of theater mixed with a piece of, I hate to say it, performance art, more like a dance, because the choreography, it needs to be kind of rigid and controlled so I don't actually hurt myself. And
Yeah.
sometimes I only find out through, at least in the beginning, by performing and hurting myself, where I needed to pull back or wear elbow pads or knee pads, and that
Right.
all kind of revealed itself pretty quickly. And as far as prep is concerned, there's a physical amount of prep before the show. I mean, you just got to do your stretching and know where your injuries, long form injuries, as I'm older now, where they're
Yeah.
coming from. So you really got to stretch that stuff out, and just utilize the control. There's no hurry. Every single person that's there at the show, they're seeing it for the first time. So I don't need to blast through the show. There's not somebody going like, waiting on in the
Right.
wings for me to get off stage. So I can slow things
Yeah.
down. Um, through time, that's sort of what reveals itself. And for vocal warm up, I mean, I, I I cannot more highly stress how important a vocal warm up is for being able to maintain the long haul of a tour. And
Yeah.
I'll explain why. Because when I was touring in the UK, for instance, if I didn't maintain vocal health, I would get on a train in the morning because I was able to tour in the UK just on the train. So let's say we catch like a 7 o'clock in the morning train, and then we go all day to the next city that we're going to. We get off the train, we go to the theater. Some of us go check in at the hotel. We're there for an hour. Then we go to the theater, we do a sound check, do warm up and everything, do the show. After the show, maybe we'll go to like the theater bar, have a drink or whatever like that, talk with the
Yeah.
people that were there at the show loudly, of course, because everybody's bloody loud. Go
Yep.
sleep, repeat, and then do that for 2 months, different city every
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
it wears on your throat. There's no day to recover, and there's no understudy. I don't have a backup. So the
Yeah.
vocal stuff, it's once you get your voice sort of warmed up, it's all about maintaining it and knowing where the stress points are. And
Right.
whenever I do a vocal warm up, it usually is like, Peter Piper the pepper picker picked the peck of pickled peppers. Like that's the type of thing you're just trying to get your voice working again, get your tongue working again.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, I mean, once you sort of hit that low maintenance where you can do your voice, you can be whatever you need to be vocally.
Yeah.
The first day that's not going to work, but by about 3 shows in, your voice is suddenly pitched to where it needs to be for performance. Um, so
Yeah.
eating right, getting enough sleep, which can be very difficult. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it depends on what kind of tour it is. And it's just as difficult if you've had 2 months off and suddenly you have like a one night show in Pittsburgh
Yeah.
and you need to be show ready. So how do you warm up for that? The night before I do a show, I sit in a parked car and I do the whole show, full voice, no microphone, full voice
Yeah.
as if I was performing the show, so that my voice has gone to the place where it needs to be, so that by
Yeah.
the next day it's not blown out, but it's ready to go. And
Yeah.
I mean, physically, you just got to watch what you eat and keep exercising as much as you can without doing
Yeah.
some kind of exercise that's going to cause more wear and tear. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm at as far as trying to maintain and be ready for the show.
Yeah. Now, have you ever had anyone walking by your car while you're warming up in your car at the top of your lungs and
Oh
like
yeah.
giving you some weird looks there? Like, what's this guy doing?
Yep, sure have. I've never had anybody call the cops on me yet, but from
Oh,
the very
thankfully,
beginning,
thankfully.
well, thankfully, yeah, but from the very beginning, it's been very difficult to go to the place where you really have to go in order to do these impressions. Like you can't hold back. You have to go fully in, and that's where sort of harnessing that inner child is great, because a
Yeah.
kid will not usually, hopefully, not be trying to censor themselves and not be having a little director on their shoulder saying, "Don't do that. It's ridiculous. People are going to think you're insane." I
Yeah.
sit in the car so that obviously I'm not on the side of the street doing it.
Yeah.
Although, when I remember some of the original rehearsals I did was in a park in Toronto during a heat wave with my buddy TJ, and I remember rehearsing in the dirt because that was the only place to rehearse. Like, I don't mean like getting in the dirt, but we just found like a patch where there was nobody around and
Yeah.
rehearsing and falling in the dirt and being completely covered in mud. And invariably,
Yeah.
some person would come walking by. And as you do when you rehearse and you're in theater, you're used to being on display and yet
Yeah.
pretending that you're not on display. You're putting up that fourth wall. The difference being with one man Star Wars, or even the stuff that any of the shows that I do, is that there is no fourth wall. I mean, I'll be in performance mode, but whatever's happening out there, I'm immediately reacting to. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think that TJ teaches doing like solo shows, and I think he's called it meta. And like meta theater is Bertolt Brecht, and previous to that, I mean, it has its origin in theater that's aware of itself, that it's not trying to be artificial, or if it is, it's admitting and showing that it's artificial and creating it differently. So you're not watching a snippet of time or something that won't interact with you. You're watching something that will, that makes it active and makes it like you're actually part of it. And that's the neat thing about doing a solo show or even my show, is that if there's a motorcycle that starts up in the middle of my show, you're damn right it's going to
Yeah.
be in there, because why would I not? It's gold. And
Yeah.
after doing the
Yeah.
show for as long as I have, anything new is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you have any particular characters, Star Wars moments or characters that you find a little bit challenging to portray, or
Challenging. Oh yeah.
or do you have a favorite character or scene that you like to portray during your performance?
Well, I've definitely answered that question before, but I mean, it's that's the way you put it is different, which is great. So the characters I find the most difficult to do are the ones that I don't naturally have the voice for. I realized
Yeah,
when I was
as you
young
mentioned
that I
Chewbacca, I
was
think you mentioned Chewbacca is kind of a little
right.
different to
Well,
play.
it's
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
difficult to be. But I remember when I was a kid, that I could do "Hi ho, Kermit the Frog." Like I could do the Jim Henson voices, but I could not
Yeah.
do any of the Frank Oz voices. I could never do Grover. I could do Yoda. Just my voice just did not go there. And there are
Yeah.
people that their voice is naturally Yoda.
Yeah.
So rather than worrying about what I can't do, like my Yoda doesn't sound like Yoda, but the inflection and the the cadence of it, I guess, in a sense, like just the rhythm, that works. It's just the actual voice itself doesn't sound like him. And I know there's people that do an exquisite Yoda, which is
Yeah.
great, but I'm doing everything. And so part of the big mental block in doing a solo show like this is that rather than focusing on rather what's not working, I focus on what is working of the thing that I don't feel perfect about, and allow the audience to go, okay, that's his Yoda. That's what we're going with. And it's fine
Yeah.
because people, for the
Yeah.
most part, accept whatever it is I'm doing. And then, so ones where I know that I really relish in it, like I don't sound like Palpatine, but I love the way he is. And I love the
Yeah.
way he's so deliciously horrible. So getting to be the scenes where I'm the Emperor, I mean, I look so forward to them because it's like the whole show is unfolded, and then I
Yeah.
get to be the delicious jerk from hell. Like the Emperor is the ultimate in the worst, dinner guest you could possibly have, because he would drink all your
Yeah.
wine, break a glass, and laugh and like just leave, and you would have no doubt as to what a complete bastard he was. It's just like that's what you'd expect. So for
Yeah.
me, I kind of get to commune with that inner son of a gun and be horrible, and it's great because if something happens out there in the audience, you're guaranteed that I'm going to just be the complete bastard that he is and relish it. That's it's my favorite parts, and I really look forward to like the show kind of culminating into this moment where um, I get to hear the audience sort of they almost anticipate what's going to happen, and
Yeah.
like some of the jokes I do as the Emperor, I just, am I going to stay just being the Emperor himself, or am I going to be a little bit different? Am I going to do this sort of style? So, um,
Yeah.
like I have little litmus test jokes at the beginning where I kind of find out what kind of an audience they are based upon what they'll laugh at. But by the time I
Right.
get to the end of the show, it's like knowing what kind of an audience I'm listening to. It
Yeah.
ends up sort of predicating the direction I'm going to take with that night's performance of being the Emperor or being Jabba the Hutt or whatever, because I know that there's the 1% out there, and these little jokes are for them. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an opportunity to test out your audience and then see how far you can get, with them. And sometimes you realize that, at least I realized that the when I thought there was only like a small portion of the people out there that got the 1% type jokes, it turns out there's actually a lot. They're just afraid of revealing themselves for whatever reason. And once they've relaxed into the show and they realize that they're amongst their brethren, it's the best. It's like going to a Star Wars convention where you're like, okay, guys, you think you're the biggest nerd? No chance. There is
Yeah.
no biggest nerd. We're just all one big nerdy sort of roiling
Yeah.
machine. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So how, because you don't use any props in your show, you don't use any
No,
costumes like that. How do you go
no.
about doing performance of characters such as like R2D2, who is like obviously quite a bit shorter than you, and then Chewbacca, who's this massive, 6 foot plus Wookiee.
Yeah, well, Chewbacca, I don't do anything. I mean, it's just I'm just Chewbacca. I mean, I might make the character look up to them, and then
Yeah,
and Chewbacca doesn't really do anything. You might go like look down, and that's it,
yeah,
right? He only makes the sort of weird whiny noises, or a couple weird snuffles. R2
yeah,
is just sort of that's all I really have to do. And I mean,
yeah,
it's not like he has anything to say. It's like you didn't get into that part where R2 was talking to Luke. Like I do actually do that in Empire, where R2
yeah,
falls into the ground, and it's like R2. It's like you be careful more next time. R2 that way,
yeah,
like that. That's what I do, and people kind of remember that. Gets by it quickly. It's not like R2 is revealing some deep information. He's just doing the thing he did. Um,
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, you make little impressions of those, but kind of get on to the next bit. There's so much fat to trim away to get to the actual story, and the fat's what we love. I only have to put a little bit of fat back into the actual story to make it more
yeah,
than palatable. And yeah, I mean, I guess the way if I'm going to be like a spaceship, it's all about teaching the language to the audience. Like, this is me as a ship,
yeah,
right? I can get my hands in it like that. That's me as the X-wing.
yeah,
That's me as whatever. Like that's me in the Tie Fighter. Like that. That's what I'm going to be. So if you see me doing that, I'm in the Tie Fighter, and they figure it out. I hope.
yeah,
And once I've kind of created that language, I can refer back to it. We use a bit of lighting to fill in the blank for like we're suddenly on the Death Star now. You need
yeah,
to have this grid, and it turns all red so that we know we're like an evil land. Even though like on the Death Star, it's there's not a bunch of grid lighting, and it's not red. It's very
yeah,
stark and utilitarian looking, but it doesn't really translate very well during my show. Um, yeah, but like if I'm going to be the Emperor, like shooting out lighting, I just sort of, I sort of clench my fingers a bit and make the noise. That's it.
yeah,
That's all you have to do.
yeah,
Like a kid, they have to be a fire engine. They just go woo, and you. That's it.
yeah,
There's no
yeah.
there's no technical prowess, and
Yeah, absolutely. And
they're so
I
cheap.
think it makes it more fun to watch too with you doing all the movements. Like even the R2, I think you were doing like the little,
Oh
the
yeah,
little whistle there, right? And it makes it more
yeah.
fun, definitely. Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
play.
Do you have a favorite character you like to play during the show, or a favorite
Oh.
scene?
Well, no, I don't. I have many different ones. It depends on what the audience likes that day. I mean, Luke is
Yeah.
always fun. He's way whinier in the first movie, and that's
Oh
very
yeah,
fun to be
absolutely.
that. Obi-Wan's great because he's so dry, and a lot of the jokes that have become bigger in my story
Yeah.
are Obi-Wan's jokes because he's the ultimate straight man. Like he's never funny hardly at all. But
Yeah.
when I usually get was cast in shows before doing the Star Wars show, I was always the straight guy. So I would set up a joke for another person to like knock it out of the park. That was what my job was. So in
Yeah.
some ways, I get to do both. I get to set up the joke and knock it out of the park. So if it's Obi-Wan talking to Luke, I set up the joke the way that Obi-Wan would probably do. Knock it out of the park as Luke, but it's just me, getting all the like the oh I'm so great. Um, and yeah, if there's like a character that I feel a great sense of release, just being able to be communing with my inner horrible person. It's the Emperor. He's just
It's
so
super. Yeah.
deliciously rotten. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I guess it's the latter part of Jedi that I get to be happily him for most of the show.
Yeah. Has, how has the audience responded to your show over the years? Like, have you had has their reaction surprised you in any way, or and can you share like maybe a funny or memorable moment from one of the shows that you performed?
Sure. Well, so okay, there's that's once again I've done the show like 4,000 times over the
Yeah.
years, and I mean, I've been to 15 different countries on 4 different continents, uh, and I think the way that a country might actually experience Star Wars is the thing I've noticed the most in the way that the audience generally uh, watch my show and react to my show. And I'll give you an example. Going to Ireland, not to Northern Ireland, but Ireland itself, uh, they don't particularly find the idea of an empire, an oppressive empire, to be something that's even laughable at. I don't even
Right.
know if they enjoyed Star Wars quite the same way that maybe the rest of the world did, because of how absurd the idea that a small group of rebels or one person in particular could affect so much change in doing something that was ostensibly a terrorist act. I mean, because that's really what
Yeah.
it is. It's a terrorist attack that stops a horrible machine. But there's all the innocence that's feathered into society that would be collateral damage. You can't say every person that was on the Death Star was worthy of dying or deserved to die, and yet they did. We're
Yeah.
just focusing on that story. Whereas if you go to Wisconsin in the States, people have had long winters. They've had lots of time to make costumes and stuff like that. And they've had a bit of a different view on life in general. And they've spent a lot of time just weathering the winter and having a good laugh and having a couple of beers. And they get my show in a different way and are
Yeah.
much more active about laughing. And then there's all the surprises, like go to like Southern Australia. And I'm thinking, well, is there any 501st here? It's like, yeah, there's a humongous group of people that they just found each other, and they, even though they seem to be in this perpetual summertime, if you have perpetual summertime, you will still be a nerd. You'll still be spending
Yeah.
copious amounts of time working on, um, like a costume or whatever. That
Yeah.
weather doesn't dictate your interests. Your interests just simply are what you are. And
Yeah.
some countries that I've been to, I'm like, it's been harder to be a nerd in the UK, at least at a certain point, than it is perhaps in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I mean, maybe it's never
Right.
easy to be a nerd, but you might not find as many people to sort of uh, be buddies with, and you may not be as accepted just at the job that you're at if you're a nerdy person.
Right.
You kind of get pigeonholed, and that's all you are. Whereas there's parts of the Canada or the States or other parts of the world where being a nerd, like you can be a respectable and cool,
Yeah.
suave person who also likes Star Wars. There's nothing wrong with that, and being a
No.
nerd is cool. So I mean, I remember going to, let's see, what was a weird place. No, it wasn't weird, but maybe the whole experience of it was a weird one. I remember doing my show in Toronto, and then I met these people who wanted me to do my show for them for their wedding, not at the wedding,
Okay.
but between the ceremony and then the reception. So their ceremony I thought was rather telling as to what they preferred, um, because the groom was dressed up as Boba Fett, and the bride was dressed up as Leia, and the best
Yeah.
man was Han. So in their opinion of the world, who they identified with, that Boba should have been with Leia, and Han could be there. It's fine. We still think you're great. But that was the world that they envisioned. And I did my show, but I did it for free because I was just like this. I just have to have the experience of doing it. And I ended up
Yeah.
only doing 20 minutes. So I just did the first movie because, that even though the group of people that were there they knew the types of people that were getting married, if they're getting married as Leia and Boba Fett and Han Solo. But not
Yeah.
everybody out there, like grandma wasn't necessarily a nerd. So it was a mercy killing for them. Or merciful that I only did 20 minutes. Some of the people really got it, some of them didn't get it, but I did it in the church, so that was kind of neat. And they got married
Yeah.
in a church, as Leia and Boba, and yeah, I did 20 minutes of my show, and then they went on. Afterwards they went on and had their reception. I didn't go on to the reception. I was just there. As I realized later, I was the foreplay. I was the as in the before
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought it was a horrible pun, but it was still kind of funny. I thought nobody else has ever found it funny, but
Yeah.
anyway.
De- Definitely a unique performance for sure, eh?
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
just before the pandemic happened, there was a really remarkable night. I was in Pittsburgh, and I'd been doing the show there for about a month. It was maybe the second to last show, and sometimes I get people that come to see the show that are kind of VIPs, and
Yeah.
the theater staff will always ask, "Did you want to know who's coming to the show?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know who's coming to the show because I don't. I just would rather, be in ignorance, do the show, and then people can talk to me afterwards." But in this
Yeah.
case here, it was Anthony Daniels that came to see the show, and the person side stage, just before I'm about to go on stage, tells me that, I see 3PO's out there. I'm like, "Oh, great, thanks a lot." No pressure. And I did the show, and at the end, which was really funny, was that he had traveled like at the during the applause. Anthony had traveled like to the side of the stage, and then came on with a microphone, and then he and I were on stage talking in front of the audience for about another 45 minutes, just going through so much stuff. And I mean, Anthony can just
Yeah.
he can vamp forever, and you know that, like, he can just go and go and go. But he was so in inviting, and it was a back and forth, and it was remarkable in the sense that if I could have told this little kid that I was living on this farm where I felt about
Yeah.
the least amount of power in the whole world at the time. I was 8 years old. I was in the new school environment on a farm kilometers away from any of my friends. That one day that the story that I love, Star Wars, that I would get to be on stage with, C3PO, and
Yeah.
get to play, like literally play, because we actually did bits of my show together on stage, even though I just done it. But he was being himself. And I'm
Yeah.
like, and of course, sounding exactly like 3PO does, because it's 3PO.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell that kid that your love of something is not limited to where you are, that your love, and you look behind you right there at your place, and you can see
Yeah.
what your love brings into the world, and even our opportunity to talk to each other. If I could
Yeah.
tell that kid back then that you will find not just people that share your passion, but it's like you guys were friends. You were already friends. You just didn't know it. You were separated by parts of the world, but you're all together. And even Anthony Daniels is just like, he didn't anticipate the world that he would be not only part of, but be part of creating. And in a weird way, I'm not creating new parts of the world, but doing, I'm keeping the world of Star Wars going. And we all are. And
Yeah.
we're allowing that story to get into us. And I think what it really teaches, going through stories, is it teaches people how to love and also to develop critical thinking. And the world needs critical thinking. Doesn't mean criticism sucks or it's great. That's how you look at, the modern sequels, where people are like, "It sucks." That
Yeah.
that's just like, it's an Amazon review. It's like, well, no, let's really take it apart. Let's look at it. Over
Yeah.
time, when people look back at any story, they will dissect it. They'll waste their time, to some people, but to others, it's critical thought. And the long life of Anthony Daniels, uh, he's very funny, philosophical, and
Yeah.
about what he's done and what he does. And even, the Leia and Boba Fett, I'm like, you've lived a long life. You don't wear these costumes all the time, but there's something that's brought you together, literally bringing you together
Yeah.
now. That
Yeah.
you I have a connection. I can bring something to the beginning of your life together through this ceremony, and I'm part of it.
Yeah.
That's There's nothing in the world I can think of other than, your love of NASCAR, that would suddenly put you in a place where you want to be, but you can't anticipate what it is until you're there.
Right. Exactly. So you mentioned meeting Anthony Daniels, who plays C3PO, and
Yep.
I've scrolled through your website and your Instagram, and it looks like you've met quite a few celebrities
Yep.
through doing these performances of the one man Star Wars trilogy and your other shows. You've
Yep.
met Warwick Davis, it looks like.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah. Work.
do you have a celebrity you would like to have show up at your show where you can meet them?
Well, meeting Ian McKellen when he came to see Lord of the Rings was about
Yeah.
the greatest crowning experience of my life I can
Yeah.
think of. I can't imagine that there's any actor out there that I idolize, that I would actually want that they would want to meet me as much as I'd want to meet them. And I'm okay in that place, like knowing that
Yeah.
sometimes we just idolize people, and that's where they belong. I mean, I'd
Yeah.
love to meet somebody like Anthony Hopkins because I mean, he probably wouldn't even want to talk about performing, but then again, he might. You just never know. Um,
Yeah.
I I mean, when my meeting with Harrison Ford, for instance, was actually working on a movie called K-19, which filmed all over Canada. It was a Catherine Bigelow
Yeah.
movie, um, and I was actually going to be either stand in for him or stand in for Liam Neeson. And I was doing the first day or two of this film where I was just doing
Yeah.
the stand in work. And this is when I had the opportunity to go and do these radio plays where eventually I did my one man Star Wars thing in Toronto. So I was living in
Yeah.
Halifax. I had the invitation to get better paid work to go out and do something that was not going to be being hanging around Harrison Ford all the time, but it was still cool. And it felt like it was something I could handle. So I left working on this film, which was going to pay a lot of money. I was going to get to be around Liam Neeson and Harrison Ford all the time. But by leaving it, I went into a much bigger world and a
Yeah.
world that sustained itself far beyond that film experience. So, like, I'll give you another weird little example of being able to sort of meet somebody. Um, and I think this is probably the ultimate, well, at least for me. I did my show and I was in Orlando doing the show for Celebration, Star Wars
Yeah.
Celebration, and I finished the show. It was on their main stage, and a huge show, like 4,000 people. And I came
Yeah.
off of the show, and I mean, because of it being the main stage, there was just continual material coming, forums and things coming on. I didn't actually know who was next after me, but I came back to the green room, and it's a very big green room, of course, and I got myself a water right away. And there's a big spread, and there was a couple people that were in there, and I just sort of like went straight for the water. I wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah.
And I turn around with the water and I'm drinking it, and I look, and there on the couch um, was John Stewart, right?
Yeah.
So John Stewart's sitting there, and next to him, he's talking to Mark Hamill, and next to Mark is Carrie Fisher, and next to Carrie Fisher
Oh
is
wow.
George Lucas. So they have George
Oh.
Lucas, Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and John Stewart sitting there on a couch. And I remember going like, maybe they won't pay attention to me if I don't pretend not to pay attention to them. So I just sat there and drank my water and pretended like I wasn't like
Yeah.
losing my mind because I didn't know what to do. I was waiting for instructions to be told to leave. There was no like personal assistant sitting around there ready to like boot me out. Like, can you just give us some space or whatever? And when I
Yeah.
looked around the room, I looked closely. There was about three other people that were doing the same thing as me, just trying to be in the room to experience like nerd heaven. And as though it couldn't get any better, suddenly Carrie Fisher looks over to me and made a comment about my show because, of course, there was the screen that was right there above them. They
Yeah.
could watch it while I was, on stage. And I know that George Lucas has certainly seen bits of my show because I got my license from him, way before that. I did not say a word to George Lucas, not a word. I'm not even going to pretend to try. Um, but yeah, I mean, what's interesting about Carrie Fisher was I was able to sort of say, "You'll never realize this, but you were supposed to go to Pomona, or sorry, Sonoma, in Arizona, and do your show, Wishful Drinking, at this Coral Springs kind of um, festival, not festival, but Performing Arts Center."
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
decided not to do it, and they needed a replacement show. So they had me do the replacement, well, replace her show with mine. So
Yeah.
I had to really thank her that she procrastinated because it was a great opportunity. And I ended up seeing Carrie Fisher like in Australia and then overseas in the UK. And what was really interesting was that and where it struck home was that they're just people. Everybody's just
Yeah.
people. That because of course they remember you. Not everybody does. I mean, I think someone like George Lucas doesn't have to remember anybody. Doesn't have to. There's
Right.
people that are
Yeah.
there making sure they do the memory for him. But like Warwick Davis, like I saw him in the UK after meeting him several times, and I was just doing a celebration in the UK. And he's like Charlie. I'm like, oh hey, I'm like, you remember me? He's like, well, of course I remember you. I'm like, oh well,
Yeah.
cool. I just didn't know. Like sometimes when you talk with people, they're there, they have a retention, maybe their memory is bigger. Others are just making small talk and moving on, and I
Yeah.
don't fault them for that at all. um, yeah, I mean, as long as you're honest about that and you sort of say, I don't remember you, I mean, I'm sure we had a great conversation, but I don't, I mean, I want to talk to you now, but I don't remember who you are.
Right.
You can work with that. Whereas if
Yeah.
it's a person going, oh hey, how's it going, I gotta get out of here, like someone like Carrie Fisher, someone like Warwick Davis, they're the real deal. And
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't talk to Mark Hamill because you don't talk to your heroes, because if you do,
Yeah.
it's never going to match up with what you want it to be. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
watched I watched him interact with people. I watched him on stage, and I'm like, that is the kind of person I want to be. Uh,
Right.
as far as just a person and a performer, like Mark Hamill is to use the swear word, the shit. He's the real deal, and he's a talent that's in my mind. I don't think they've ever really fully taken advantage of the towering talent that Mark Hamill is, and
Yeah.
he's not gone. So there's opportunities galore for him to continue to do what he does.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned going to like traveling to places all over the states, Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
What's the furthest place you've taken your Star Wars, your one man Star Wars trilogy to? And
Well,
do
it
you
was probably
also do
Dubai.
you have a Dubai? Okay. And do you have like a dream venue or place you would like to take it one day?
Well, Dubai was about as far away because it was 12 hours difference time zone wise. So that's as far away as I guess I can think of. Um, I mean, as far as like remote and weird places, I mean, I remember being in Tasmania. I'm like, why in the world am I in Tasmania doing the show?
Yeah.
But there I was in Tasmania doing the show. I mean, I've done the Sydney Opera House like 4 times.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as far as the way it looks on the outside, it's like that. Is it going to get any bigger than that? Like that's a crazy cool place to go to.
Yeah.
I've never. I mean, I've done the show off Broadway in New York. I was there for 6 months. So I mean, I guess people have the idea, the hope of what theater they're going to go perform at. Theaters, there's just so many of them in the world that every time I have an opportunity to perform in that theater, I'm like the little theater that was near where I lived. We
Yeah.
moved from Prince George and we moved to a place called Nelson, down by
Yeah.
the near to the U.S. border, but in British Columbia still. And we had our little theater, the Capitol Theater.
Yeah.
That was a magical place in that it introduced me not just to the opportunities to be in theater and to perform, but it was the world of theater, this little place. So when I go to perform my show on a local stage, for some people, this is the world of theater. This is everything. This is their introduction. This is what's going on. And I feel like I'm part of a bigger thing that I can't I can't really quantify. I can't see the future. I can't even really find out exactly where I belonged in the past. I only know where I happen to be in that particular moment. And there have been
Yeah.
people that I've met years after having performed for them who say that my show was part of the decision they made to pursue theater themselves, because they saw what they themselves could do, the things that they loved that they could put on stage. And
Yeah.
that's what a gift, right? So, I mean, if I
Yeah.
had some dream venue, not so much a venue. I think if I ever had a dream, it would be to do my show in a way that ended it, that brought it to a twist tie, perfect ending. And in that
Yeah.
venue would be someone like George Lucas or Harrison Ford or Mark Hamill.
Yeah.
people that maybe were there from the original stuff, they could see my
Yeah.
show, but that I could also bring it to a sweet conclusion, and then
Yeah.
say like, well, what else can I do with it? It's like nothing. I can put it away, and it's there. It's done. So
Yeah.
I'm not even 50 years old yet, but I'm older, and I think about how long I've done the show, and you start to really go, well, how much longer will I do this? Because when I was 27 years old and started doing the show, I had journalists asking me like, so how long do you really think you're going to do this type of thing? I'm like, well, I hope I'm not doing it when I'm like 50 years old. And I'm like, I'm almost 50 and I'm doing it still. I'm just lucky enough to be able to
Yeah.
continue to do it when
And
I'm
do something
kind of
that you love as well.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a remarkable thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what impact has the show had on your theater career and your personal life as well?
Well, I think theater career, I mean, I'm not an actor. I do a one man Star Wars show. It hasn't
Yeah.
actually, it's impacted where I belong in theater, maybe,
Yeah.
or the way people perceive it. But I've never had any other offers to do other shows, weirdly enough. And when I've auditioned for stuff, it's not like the work comes rolling in. It's just as difficult to get a role in a regular show as it
Yeah.
was before I started doing one man Star Wars. This just happens to be my gig. And so, what it personally has done to me is it's put me in this place where a lot of times I don't look at the limitations of what we can do as limitations. It's just how we're going to be audacious and go for it. It's it's remarkable that we can limit ourselves so much with these
Yeah.
mental sort of barriers. Whatever you think you can do, you can, but you have to have the boldness to try it. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go the way you want it. And I certainly didn't attach any intentions with this show to the way it's unfolded. It's just unfolded the way that it has, and I've been there for every moment. Um, so yeah, it's probably put into my mind uh, a sense that we can do anything if
Yeah.
we do put our minds to it, because you know it's what's happened with this show. Um, hard to be intentional and unintentional, and hard to have goals and also be open to whatever just happens. It's hard to sort of
Yeah.
have a mortgage to pay, but no financial plan. You're just sort of winging it as you go,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
life in some ways.
Yeah. So before we go,
Mhm.
are there any other movie franchises that you'd like to expand into, or do you even consider maybe the prequel trilogy, maybe doing that one day?
Well, I did one man Lord of the Rings, one man Avengers, one man Stranger Things, one man Dark Knight, which is the
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan versions. I do one man Pride and Prejudice, which is actually based upon the miniseries from the BBC that came back in 1995 with Colin Firth
Yeah.
and an actress named Jennifer Ely. I also do other solo shows. I mean, it was kind of easy to keep doing other solo shows. And I'm working on a one man Harry Potter, of course, because
Yeah.
why wouldn't you? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard now to watch a show and not think of it as how am I going to angle it to be my one man show. I used to just
Right.
watch stuff because I wanted to watch things and I could just love it or like it or not like it. And
Yeah.
now I look at something and it's not for the enjoyment's sake, and I lose some of the freedom of being able to watch a show and not look at it from that kind of perspective. So I've actually stopped looking and just started to love. It's almost
Yeah.
like going out there and dating new shows, and hopefully you
Yeah.
meet that right one that just works for you. Um,
Right.
yeah, I mean the prequel trilogy, I've certainly thought about it, but I kind of find that even like with the sequels, that there is so much animosity, so much mean spirit behind it, that the
Yeah.
original Star Wars is imbued and it's loved, revered
Yeah.
by people, whereas the new ones are. people are highly critical of. They hate
Yeah.
characters in it. They hate the direction they went. And I don't want to be part of that mean spirit. That's not what I'm all about. I am truly about
Right.
celebrating the love of something, my love
Yeah.
of Star Wars, the celebration of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, rather than go into that place where I might go down the dark path, I think I'm
Yeah.
looking to be more like Luke and yeah, celebrate love. So maybe I'll do like a new Star Warsy thing, but it would have to be something more like Andor because Andor is exquisite. You know, just
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
so good and so serious. There's so little levity in the story. I'm like, this is prime to be parodied. Something that's just like
Yeah.
totally serious about itself. Yeah, bring it on.
Yeah. Yeah. How about Ahsoka? What are your thoughts on the Ahsoka series so far?
Oh, once again, well, hey man, I so far I love it. I'm
Yes.
willing to go as far as it's going to take me. Yeah,
Yeah.
it, it's
Yeah.
it's crazy the directions that they go and the stories that they're following, and yeah, I just bring it on. I mean, I find
Yeah.
that these new television series that they're doing or the Disney streaming series are
Yeah.
exactly what the world's been needing. And rather than going with these massive films, um, I get so much more for me out of these
Yeah.
here. They don't have the same staying power. Like it's not like I would rewatch, um, Mandalorian in the same way. I would
Yeah.
watch it, all again, but it doesn't feed quite the same way as the films that are crafted. Films that are
Yeah.
crafted are so intentional, and I think that when they make TV, there's a little bit more. We'll do it this way, and that's
Yeah.
fair. But yeah, but the
Yeah.
characters themselves are just wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we go, what
Hmm.
do you want to just let people know where they can find you again? And if
Yeah,
are you going on tour again? Where can people see your show next?
always on tour. You can see me at onemanstarwars.com. I'm on Meta. I'm on Instagram. Obviously,
Yeah.
you mentioned that. I think I show up on Twitter or something like that, but I don't. Things just go there. And they can see me coming up. I'll be in Whitehorse. I'm going to be in New York City. I'm going to be in back in Pittsburgh. I'll be in Philadelphia. I'm also going to be going overseas to Ireland. I'll be going up to Alaska in the spring for like a rather lengthy tour. So if you happen to be up in Alaska, please come see it.
Yeah.
And there's always just shows that are popping up. Um, yeah, I think I mentioned I'll be like in Whitehorse. Like
Yeah.
it's a funny thing to like to sort of pop off to Whitehorse to do the show, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So if you're in the UK, the United States, Canada, just check out my schedule. It's continually updating, and yeah, I was even going to be doing the show for somebody's bar mitzvah, but luckily I don't have to do it now. So, which would be the first time I'd ever do a show for a bar mitzvah, but not so.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Charlie, for coming on and talking Star
Thanks for
Wars and
having me.
talking about your show. Thank you very much. And we'll
My
talk to you
pleasure.
later.
Thanks for having me.
But definitely check out Charlie Ross and the One Man Star Wars Trilogy on social media, on Instagram, and on his website to check out his tour dates. I'll leave everything linked down in the description below. But let me know down in the comments, have you seen Charlie Ross perform at a theater near you, or even at Star Wars Celebration if you had gone to Star Wars Celebration? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and then click to watch one of my other reviews. Thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.